If we will resume the meeting, at our council meetings, many times we have scouts who come in to participate, observe a meeting, and usually it's involved in a merit badge. Tonight we have with us Blaine Fry. If you would stand, please, here from Troop 59. We're glad. Special to me because that is the troop in which my sons were scouts a couple years ago. Glad to have you here. And this means you don't have to stay for the whole meeting. Okay, you can leave when you think you've heard enough. Thank you. We'll proceed then.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
I did ask him why he chose this one.
Yeah, why? Good thinking.
And he said, I don't know, it's long.
Yeah,
So I think you'll be cutting out.
right. Believe it or not, we have some meetings that go 30, 40 minutes. Whatever, so good choice.
You picked a good one.
We will continue then with our the presentation, the next segment, go to with, I believe, is that going back to Mr. Sublet?
All right, so we're at today. And looking at the Heartland Park property, one of the issues is facing the city is the Heartland Park property itself. We've talked about this quite a bit through council meetings and different meetings, that there is significant debt associated with Heartland Park, that there is a mortgage of about $1.94 million from Core First, $532,000 from the Small Business Association, and then a $500,000 loan from the Department of Commerce. All those are attached to the property. And also the Core First loan is attached to the reversionary interest owned by Jayhawk. So that is obviously one issue, that there's this debt associated with the property. We've talked about the threat of foreclosure, that Core First could foreclose on the property. And then the reversionary interest, which we've talked about a little bit, that Jayhawk Racing owns reversionary interest, meaning once the bonds are paid off, that the entire property reverts back to Jayhawk. That is a property right that has a value to it. So we've been asked, are there other plans? Are there other plans besides purchasing the reversionary interest and clearing the debt? Is there something else you could come up with? I personally asked the attorney for the Department of Commerce about when that came up, okay, we have this plan, or are there other plans that you would approve? And what I've been told is that unless the city is able to acquire free and clear title of the property, that they wouldn't approve of a plan. So just to address kind of where we're at today. And we'll talk more about each of these issues as we move forward, especially the reversionary interest, to try to boil it down into what that means, because I know that's been a confusing issue as we move forward. And we're actually going to let Mr. Gerber try to explain it, since he keeps saying I'm talking to legalese, that he's going to give it a shot tonight. So.
Thank you, Mr. Sweat. Yeah, Chad took a shot earlier in the presentation at some financial concepts, so I'm going to take a shot here at some legal concepts. This is an issue that comes up over and over and over again, and one we seem to stub our toe on. We seem to struggle with being able to explain this at an elementary level so that people can understand it. And so we talked through some potential examples, and the one we came up with, which may not be totally relatable, but that maybe people can understand a little bit better, is a trust situation, a trust scenario. So let's say your grandparents leave you some money and put it into a trust. That money is yours, and it has value. It's real, it has value, but it's not yours. It is yours, but it's not yours in the sense that it's not yours until certain conditions are met. You turn 18, you graduate from college, you move out of the house, you slacker. There's a number of conditions that they could put on that trust. And so for us, it's not necessarily an everyday example, but it's a more understandable example of something people can relate to, what the reversionary interest in the property is. Ray has an interest in that. Jayhawk Racing has an interest in that property. It's real, it has value, but it doesn't come to fruition unless certain conditions are met. So that's my stab at taking on a high-level legal concept.
And I would think you did a much better job than I have historically of explaining that. Yes, the reversionary interest, just to hit it one more time, it was established in 1988. It's been a part of this. And just, I said it in the paper and I just want to say it here that moving forward with whoever the new operator is, if this body moves forward with this plan, there will not be a reversionary interest as part of the contract moving forward. Some people kind of giggle at that, but that's something that I think needs to be stated, that that is in no way, shape, or form the intent or will be part of it, because what it does is it gives somebody an actual right in the property, that they have a right, it has a value, that we will structure it differently moving forward.
Questions? Councilman Jensen.
It's been asked of me by some of my constituents, are there terms that would break the existing reversionary interest, such as the fact that he's performed so poorly, that there's been a significant amount of money that the city's been required to pay? They're looking for anything other than buyout as an option. Has that been reviewed, and is there any such thing?
I've reviewed the operating agreement. I've also had other attorneys in my office review it. We've also engaged outside counsel to review it, to look at those issues. Unfortunately, there really weren't performance matrices placed into that operating agreement in 2005. There are ways that we could take possession of the property, but not the reversionary interest. But they're not tied to performance matrices, which again is why moving forward we need to have those performance matrices in any contract we have with an operator.
Thank you.
And we welcome Councilman Cohen to join us. Councilman Shem.
A couple of questions. One, is it possible for CoreFirst to foreclose before the city council has a chance to meet again? And along with that question, if and when they do foreclose, are they foreclosing only on Jayhawk Racing? Are they foreclosing on part of the city's interests? Can we clarify exactly who CoreFirst would be foreclosing on?
Thank you, Mayor, if I may, and council. CoreFirst has the option to foreclose at any time. And just since February 28th, they've had the option to foreclose. So to address that part first, and if they foreclose, they're foreclosing on both the reversionary interest and the property. That CoreFirst would have the ability then it would go to a sheriff's sale and anybody could purchase that property. And under the workout agreement that we have, if CoreFirst would indicate they're going to foreclose, then we would have a 30-day option to essentially pay off those loans and purchase the reversionary interest, the property. If you're going to ask me how much would that cost, I have no idea. It would be what the cost of the loans are against the property at the time.
As a follow-up then to Councilman Jensen's question, I have a gut feeling after talking to many people that under that scenario you just described, there would be absolutely no bailout to Jayhawk Racing from the city. Would that be a correct understanding? CoreFirst forecloses and then gives the city the option to buy the property without a reversionary interest.
Well, we would have the option to purchase the property, but we would not have a expanded Star Bond district in order to address our debt service.
But I am correct in saying at that point there would be no bailout to Jayhawk Racing.
There would be no purchase of Jayhawk Racing's property right.
Councilwoman Claire.
I'm not sure where this fits into your presentation, it may come later, but who's responsible for the water bill and the electric bill that's outstanding? Will we have to pay that, or how does that come into play?
Mr. Mayor, if I may, in the closing, if this were to go forward and out of the distribution that Jayhawk gets for their reversionary interest, they would have to pay the water bill and all utility bills out of that. They have to pay for all vendors under the agreement. There's a slide that gets to that breaks down who has to pay what. But no, that's fine. But the water bill will be paid out of their distribution of the bonds.
Councilman Jensen.
Going back to the previous question, to play off what Mr. Shum said, so if they foreclose, Jayhawk Racing would still have their reversionary interest, correct?
Now, if they foreclose on both the reversionary interest and the property.
Okay, thank you.
Councilwoman Ortiz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for, in elementary terms, breaking it down, the reversionary interest for me. I appreciate that. I guess I'm just a little confused, because one minute I hear we own the track, and the next minute I hear that we don't own the track. And then here it says in 1988, city purchased Heartland Park. So do we own the track or do we not own the track?
If I may, Mayor, we own the track subject to all of the liens against the property from Core First, the Small Business Association, and the Department of Commerce, and the reversionary interest.
And who? I'm sorry.
And the reversionary interest.
And okay, so it's the three parties again, what we've always talked about. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilwoman De Lisla.
Thank you, Mayor Wolgas. Mr. Sublette, so I just want to make a point clear, and maybe I'm not understanding this correctly, but I think that we should be very cautious when we talk about foreclosure, because foreclosure will not only signify that, yes, there will be also a foreclosure on that reversionary clause. However, there will also be a potential of $10.6 million in expenditures to the city of Topeka, therefore transferred to the constituents. And in addition to that, the funds that are owed, which were brought up by Councilwoman Clear, which are the debt to the water and everything else, would also go under that, and the city would see none of that money retrieved. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have in several emails, of course, our email inboxes have been very full with all of this. Can you answer whether or not Irwin put in or contributed his $7 million as required by the bonds of 2006? Do you know if the money borrowed from Core First was utilized in the project?
The person that needs to answer that just stepped out for a second. So,
I can ask it again later.
all right.
He's doing his tech service for the moment.
His text.
No, seriously, I can ask it again.
Okay.
Oh, here he is.
You're on deck.
Okay, Doug, I'm going to read this question again. Can you answer whether or not Irwin put in or contributed his $7 million as required by the bonds of 2006? And do you know if the money borrowed from Core was utilized in the project?
Councilwoman Schwartz, the money borrowed from whom? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that part.
Core First.
From Core
The
First.
money borrowed by Irwin from Core First was utilized in the project. In
Thank
other
you.
words, was that money, the $7 million that he was required by the Star Bonds to invest, has it been invested, and was the money used from Core in the racetrack?
So I recognize this question, and the answer really is that he has until the conclusion of the original Star Bond District to make that required investment. The 50/50 test only requires, by statute, only requires that you have to have those funds invested by the end of the district, which in this case is 2025.
So the simple answer is no, he has not. It has not been invested in the track.
He hasn't invested monies into the track. Has he completed the entire amount? No, because that's not required until the end of the project. If you give me a little chance to do some digging, I'll dig through my notes here and I can
Find out
maybe
how
give you
much
a
has
rundown
been.
of where
Thank you.
that's at.
Thank you.
Okay, while we're doing that, Councilman Jensen.
So would then the balance of that $7 million that has not been invested fall to the new operator, since we're assuming Jayhawk Racing will cease to exist once this is done?
That's a legal question.
Yeah, whatever whatever's owed under that 50/50 test will go to the new operator.
And I assume then that they've been made aware of that.
Yes.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
also, didn't you say earlier that in the future, there will not, it will not be similar to the past, where they will have to make investments as the process goes along?
Right, yeah, we're not
I
going to
thi-
measure
I think
this.
we're getting sort of convoluted here in our discussion.
Yeah, it's not going to be, we're not going to wait 11 years to see if they've done it. There'll be matrices along the way
Right.
to make sure it's been met.
Okay, does that help to clarify? All right, Councilman Claire.
Thank you. Just a question, if we bought Heartland Park through foreclosure, would we own it free and clear and then we could sell it?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Did you
I'm sorry.
get that? I think we have to read.
I was trying to get a question
That's
answered.
okay.
Okay, we need to repeat the question.
If we bought Heartland Park through foreclosure, would we have it, then own it free and clear, and then we could sell it?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
But we
You
still owe
want to-
10 million on it.
I mean, it,
But we still have the debt service to deal with.
So, Mr. Mayor and council, and I want to go back to the statements that, living up to the idea that Councilmember Ortiz had identified, and complete disclosure. When we were entering into the workout agreement, it was a totally different environment at that time. And while we recognized that there was always an opportunity that this deal would fall apart and that Core First could step in and foreclose on that property, what we wanted to do was to protect the city's interest. And so what we do is we have the option of, within, I believe, a 30-day period to step in and purchase the foreclosed property for the same cost that Core First got it. The only way that we would do that is if we had a buyer of the property or if there was a deal that made sense to us. But it still leaves us without the expanded Star Bond District. It really is, I don't want people to walk away from it and say, well, now we're obligated to take that action. It is an option available to us that we could exercise if we chose to do so, and it was in the city's best interest. There is no discussion of that happening at this point.
Just to clarify, I would like to go back to Councilman, I believe it was Jensen's question about the new operator and the 7 point. I want to go back and look at the Star Bond Act because I believe I'm accurate in the statement that I'm making, but I will get that. I want to go back and look at the Star Bond Act and where that money would be applied, and then I can get a written answer out to the council. We can get it out to the public just to make sure that I'm accurate on that statement.
Thank you.
we're ready to move on to the next phase. We're ready to move on to the next phase of the presentation.
We're done bickering.
All right. Please continue.
Council, you've seen this slide before. As I indicated from the top of the presentation, this is a slide we'd come back to a couple times just to sort of refocus why we're where we're at and what we believe is the best path going forward. To reiterate, there's really two paths going forward. One is that we do issue the Star Bonds, which we believe, based on the information we know now, will have sufficient revenue to cover our debt service and will not need to be supplemented by property tax. The second scenario has two parts, really, and the first is we could not issue the Star Bonds, and the tract could go dark. It could get foreclosed upon. No one could buy it. The tract could go dark, and there'd be no operations there. Again, we know for a fact that we owe approximately $10.6 million in debt service. That's a fact moving forward. That's not going to change. The second scenario under not issuing Star Bonds is that the tract could find an operator and continue to operate in the manner it operates now, where we're receiving approximately $200,000 a year in Star revenue, which would lower that 10.6 amount owed by about 2.4 million, and then would have to be offset by 8.2 million in property tax revenue. So again, we'll come back to this slide, I think, a couple more times in the presentation just to sort of refocus what we believe the core problem is.
Okay, who has the next slide? All right.
Thank you, Mayor. This is what I just referenced a few minutes ago. Under the MOU, it spells out who gets paid and what the distributions are. So Jayhawk Racing, we would purchase their reversionary interest for $2.39 million. Out of that $2.39 million, Jayhawk would be responsible for a $300,000 loan to Core First, a payment to the city of Topeka for $184,000 to pay all vendors, and we have 86 vendors. We believe that's an accurate number. And again, when you're talking about this, if this were to go forward at the date of closing, we'll know who those vendors are because some of them could be getting paid. We'll know what that exact number is, but Jayhawk Racing is responsible for paying those. That would include the water bill and the electric bill. There's a distribution to Core First of $1.94 million that will clear the loans owned by Core First. And then the $532,000 to the Small Business Administration, $500,000 to the Department of Commerce. And then I'll let Doug explain that interest at the bottom. I believe it's just interest on the bonds.
Yeah, the explanation is as simple as that. If we move forward with issuance of approximately $5 million in bonds, based on a debt service scenario, we would stand to pay approximately $1 million in interest between now and 2025. This is also my slide to talk about. The intent of this slide is to compare and contrast the current district revenues and the potential new district revenues. So as has been discussed at length, all of these scenarios envision a 1% growth. The question was asked earlier whether or not that's a conservative enough number. I believe, two independent reviews believe that those are reasonable assumptions moving forward. But just so everyone understands, those are the assumptions we made, that there would be a 1% growth in the district. So you can see, really the important part here is the aggregate. We can compare year by year, but the aggregate of the potential expanded district would generate just south of $18 million in revenue, whereas the current district only generates about 2.4. So that, again, takes us back to what we've been talking about all along from the beginning of this process, that the new district really does allow us to capture those sales tax revenues and supplement our bond payments.
If I could just ask on that,
Please.
that the first line, 2015, that's $207,846, correct? Or is that 207 million? Because, see, there's 207 million. It looks like, yeah, to see,
Mr. Mayor, that is 207,846.
and,
Apparently, we rounded it out to 3 decimal
okay,
places.
I think that's my point. I want to clarify to people, because I think, looking up there, we're looking at 207 million.
Thank you. Yeah.
Just that we have 3 cent points, or however.
That's why I tend to talk in broad,
We
in round numbers.
could
because
even take off the cents, maybe, and just round up to dollars.
I think we probably could, yes.
That would be okay.
Thank you.
We're getting a little cocky with our financial management. We want to take it one more level.
I think we're getting a little bit over precise here. All right, and then the other one is the same. They're just cents. I mean, it's just 2 cent levels.
Yes, so just so everyone's clear, 2015, current district, we're estimating revenues to be 207,846.
Stop. No cents. All right.
No sense. If the district were expanded, we would be looking at $1.339,707.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's helpful.
Thank you for
Okay,
that.
moving on. We're really not into questions, but we'll, just to clarify. All right. All right. Well, let's go on. Let's go on. We're going to get through this, then we'll go to questions.
So we can probably move through this. Again, it's just another illustration of the existing Star Bond district. If the plan goes forward, this is the new expanded star bond district. There we go. So Doug, if you want to start, and then I can talk about legislative post-audit.
One of the questions that staff has received, and I'm sure that the council has received, and I know it's been covered ad infinitum in various sources, is we're asking, you're basing these numbers on projections. Why are the projections you're making now better than the ones that were made in 2004, 5, 6? Why are these numbers more trustworthy? So we talked about that a bit earlier in terms of the independent audit review, which Chad will get into. We've had it reviewed by LPA, we've had it reviewed by CPA. For Mr. Cohen's benefit, S&P, who's our bond rating agency, has upgraded the city's financial management piece to their highest rating possible. So they believe in the city's financial management team. But really most importantly is the previous projections or assumptions were based on sort of a field of dreams model. If you build it, they will come. So if this district happens, there will be expansion. It was based on growth. Not only growth within the district, but actually new businesses coming into the district. We've been, I keep using this word, reasonable and conservative in our projections and assumptions, and have based our models on what exists in the district as we know it today. Could that change? Of course. But we've tried to temper those potential changes with the fact that we have been reasonable and conservative in our assumptions and our approach.
And now to go to the second piece, legislative post-audit, as everybody is probably aware, legislative post-audit did an unprecedented audit of this project. As the name would suggest, it's usually post-audit that they're auditing projects after they're completed. In this case, they actually did an audit of this project before it had even begun. But we welcomed the audit, that it didn't cost the city anything. And I think it's always good to have another audit of your project to make sure you're on track. You should have received a letter from Scott Frank that talked about their process of working with the city. I think it's important to point out in that letter that we spent hours with them on the phone. We provided every document that was requested. We gave them unfettered access to city staff and to documents that they felt we were helpful in providing the information, and we were cooperative and responsive through the process. So again, there were several auditors assigned to this project. I know that Mr. Kaufman, Mr. Gerber, Mr. Colson, myself, and our legal staff, we just gave them free rein to whatever they wanted to look at and answered their questions. And I think everybody was pleased at the end of the day that in their scope of work, they looked at 8 different things and found that we met the legal requirements and the financial requirements under the current Star Bond Act on each one of those areas. And I'm not going to read the entire report. I will save you that. But I just wanted to highlight a few things. One is the purpose of the current proposal is to retain Heartland Park rather than to develop or expand the park. Their conclusion was that this fit within the Star Bond statute. Use of the proceeds to purchase the reversionary interest and secure clear title met the requirements of the Star Bond Act. There were some questions, as everybody's had, about the reversionary interest. There was lots of questions from post-audit from their attorneys regarding the reversionary interest. They saw it, as we have explained, as a property right and something that can be used under Star Bond proceeds. Economic impact of the current proposal. There's been economic impacts out there everywhere from $45 million from Washburn to $160 million, which was one commission, a Hedges report commissioned by Core First. What legislative post-audit said is they believe it's $53 million annually is the economic impact of Heartland Park, which is significant to the city of Topeka. Doug has talked about the increment calculation. Using 2005, they wondered if that was an appropriate year to use, and they found yes, that was an appropriate year. And actually, if you go back and look at the Starbond statutes in 2005, Heartland Park is specifically spelled out as an eligible expense under Starbonds. It's a racing facility located in Shawnee County, Kansas, so I'm pretty sure they were referencing Heartland Park in the legislation in 2005. The financial solvency of the current proposal, and they looked at the analysis of the expanded district to pay off the debt. They reviewed the city's financial analysis and found the calculations and assumptions of 1% growth was reasonable. So again, this isn't just the city saying it's reasonable, it's an independent accounting firm saying it's reasonable, and it's legislative post-audit finding that it's reasonable. And then the 50-50 test, the plan put forward, they also found were reasonable. So we were pleased, but we were pleased that legislative post-audit found that in terms of the city, that we had done things the right way in terms of not only the legal piece, but the financial piece. And I think it's fair to say that, you know, they weren't auditing us to look for all the good things. I mean, they dug and spent quite a bit of time and found that we met all the requirements in all 8 areas.
We've also touched on this slide in terms of conversations. We've had conversations about it already in this presentation, but we want to come back to it and give you sort of a visual representation of what we talked to earlier in terms of a debt service schedule. This was the original debt service schedule that was run in the middle of last year. As noted at the beginning of the presentation, it was only a model. It was a way for city staff to determine whether or not that the district would be financially viable from a big picture, long-term perspective. When we ran the model, when Columbia Capital, who's our financial advisors, ran the model, we concluded that indeed it was, and so we felt comfortable moving forward. This is, it's certainly a lot more interesting to say that Heartland Park revenues will fall short, but if you note in the first couple of years, in fact, based on this model, that would be true. But as we've talked about, this was meant to be a level payment model where if you look at the total debt that we would pay year over year, it remains fairly consistent, right? We've talked about how we can structure the debt instead so that it is a model that reflects the available incremental revenue to offset our debt. That's another way to approach it. The other thing that I think is worth pointing out from this original model is that if you look at the very last line, last column, you'll see that in 2025, for example, it was estimated that revenues would exceed total debt by almost $800,000. That was glossed over in the article, that was ignored, and certainly something we took into account because the bottom line from this scenario is the city would be net positive at the end of the district. So again, I think that we've talked about it, but I think it's worth, I think it's worth re-emphasizing with this slide.
Mr. Mayor? Yes. So we've got a couple of slides that I think they're redundant to conversations we've already had. I'm going to ask us to use this as the next question spot, and we're going to jump to what's slide 24 on ours. And what I'd like to do after questions is to have Chad give an overview as to where we stand today from a legal perspective, and then we can talk about the operator that we've been dealing with, and then wrap it up from there and open it up for questions going forward.
So you lost me there. Do we want to go to questions now?
Questions now.
From what we have just, this last segment. I want to go back to, Councilman Jensen had one earlier that I didn't acknowledge, and then you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So going back to the slide where we issued new star bonds, if I'm reading that correct, if we had zero growth in that district, it would still be sufficient to cover the debt. Is that correct?
I have not examined that scenario, but I guess I wouldn't want to answer that. But the way I would answer that is that with the expanded district and the new revenue, no matter what, we're ahead of where we are at currently. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Now, yeah, Councilman Shem.
All right, just for clarification, the same slide with the two possible futures.
Wait a minute, I'm sorry. Okay, if we're gonna have questions, you need to be here to be able to respond to that. Okay.
All right, we were looking at the slide again that we've looked at many times tonight with the two possible futures. And we stated that with the 8.2 million that would be owed by the city is based on how the track is operating as of now. Most would agree that the track is not operating in anything approaching an optimal level. Is it possible that the city could owe less than 8.2 with a manager actually operating the track efficiently? I agree it probably would not be $8.2 million worth, but would it be a possible smaller number with a proficient operator?
Councilman Shum and council, yeah, the answer to your question would be yes. If under the current scenario, or not in the current scenario, but if there were a new operator operating at a more effective level and the current district without an expansion generated additional sales tax, then yes, that 8.2 number would go lower.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Schwartz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be trying to be brief here. You indicated that it brings in 53 million in economic development impact. Do we know the appraised value of the track? And the proposal that we have that we're looking at says a purchase or lease of Heartland Park Raceway. And I've heard so many people say that we should not be in the business of, the city should not be in the business of a racetrack. Is there any way in the future we could sell the racetrack and not be involved as the owner of the racetrack as a city?
I'll take the appraised value question. That it was appraised in the recent past as $15.3 million, the value of the track and property.
So it's 15.3 million that would be if Core First foreclosed and they sold it off, that's the appraised value. And then the buyer, the new buyer, if the purchaser was the proposed purchaser we're looking, or at least the arrangement we're looking at, could possibly make 53 million economic. Is that the economic impact to the Heartland Park or to the city? How much would they make as a revenue?
Well, the $53 million number suggested by Legislative Post Audit is an overall citywide economic impact, yes.
Okay. But my question still is there ever a chance we can get out of the business of running a racetrack?
We could, Mayor and Councilman Schwartz, we could be out of this with a decision by this body to not proceed with the deal. For Core First would ultimately foreclose on the property, or Jayhawk could sell the property. So yes, we certainly could. The cost of that is the expanded Star Bond district as it exists today, and the secondary is the potential loss of Heartland Park. But yeah, there's a very strong scenario that we could be out of it.
I was trying to be positive in the sense that a buyer might buy it for the profit of making a business out of it instead of the city owning it. And I'm sure that is the case in some scenarios with racetracks across the country, that it's not always owned by a municipality. So I was wondering, is there any positive effort to move forward that we would get out of the business and sell the racetrack with the Star Bonds, everything, if it is a profitable business?
Mr. Mayor and Councilman Schwartz, I think it is stretching the imagination to say that we're in the racing business. We have really nothing other than, and have not had anything other than an underlying real estate interest in the property that that really gave us no rights under that land because it was a management agreement and there was the reversionary interest provision. I think the fear that people rightly shared early on is that they didn't want to see the city get into the racing business, and we conceded that point very early on, that we did not see ourselves starting a department of racing. Our objective, and it's our objective, is to handle this real estate transaction in such a way that it provides the greatest benefit to the city, that being the expansion of the Star Bond District and putting the land in the control of somebody who can operate it both from an operational and from a financial capacity so that it is successful. Those are the options that are available to us at this point. The other option is that if we let the land go through however it goes, through a foreclosure and a repurchase, and it could stay as a racetrack, it certainly could. But it also, I don't think that, even though there's an appraised value of $15.3 million, I think that if Core First or anybody else thought they could get $15 million for it, I think a lot of people would have bought it by now.
With other questions? Seeing none, we will then move on as you were proposing that we would do.
Yeah, I think is it slide 24? Is that where we're moving to? All right, so again, where we are today, I'm going to talk briefly about the court case. There was this decision by the district court that the document put forth to call for a vote was not valid. That decision was upheld by the Court of Appeals. Mr. Emming has applied for certification to the state Supreme Court. That's where it stands right now. The Supreme Court hasn't decided whether to accept certification on that issue or not. If you ask me, when do I think they're going to do that? I don't predict when courts are going to do anything, but I imagine it will be a little while down the road. Previously, when we were dealing with court cases, there were stays in place that prevented us from moving forward. There's no stay in place currently, and Mr. Emming has not asked for a stay to prevent us from moving forward. In terms of the racing season, depending on that'll depend a lot on the decision this body makes on May 5th. If we move forward, there's a new operator in place. That operator that we've been talking to has indicated they're ready to take over and move forward right away. If it goes through foreclosure, I can't tell you who's going to purchase it, what the racing season will look like. In the coming weeks, we're planning 2 different town hall meetings so that the public can again ask us questions. I think we're tentatively, and the city manager can correct me if I'm wrong, planning one April 28th at 6 o'clock. And then again on Wednesday at 11 in the morning. The one on the 28th would be at the public library, and the one the following morning would be at the Holiday Building.
Okay, are you finished, ready for questions, or are you going on?
I'm
Okay,
sorry.
I think, would you repeat those dates?
Yeah.
Specifically, times and locations, so that
Yeah,
we
I'm
get some
sorry, I
clarity.
was reading and looking down and not talking to the microphone. April 28th at 6 p.m. in the public library, and April 29th at 11 a.m. at the Holiday Building. And then I think we can get that also posted on our, I'm sure we can get that posted on our website, so anybody interested can go and look at that. And I'm sure the media will get that information out there as well, so it'll be well publicized. Yeah.
All right, so do you want to put this on?
So we talked about a little bit about the RFP process. Again, there was an RFP that was put out in December. We got several responses to that. We looked at 4, went through an objective process to evaluate those. That we received a letter of intent from Chris Payne, who's the principal in Monopoly Acquisitions, who then has created Shelby LLC as the potential entity that would operate Heartland Park. And I think the plan is for May 5th, next week, that either he or representatives from his company would be available to ask questions, their view on the park, what their vision is. And I think there's a video that we were,
Mr. Mayor, we have a 3-minute video we thought might be just interesting. Watch that. And then I think we'd, at that point, like to wrap up this conversation and open it up for any questions that you all may have.
And so tell me about your background and what Shelby is, just a little bit about your experience.
Well, Shelby's a standalone entity that's really set up for this situation only.
Okay.
Primarily, our company's Monopoly Acquisitions. We have some other companies, but that would be a mothership, per se. I'm involved in commercial real estate, development, redeveloping. We own, operate a lot of commercial properties in the Kansas City area, suburbs around it. Also been involved in racing.
What kind of racing?
Specifically drag racing.
Did you fund a team, or did you actually drive one of those rockets?
Both those, and the track in Kansas City that was negotiated to sell to the city, the combination.
Okay. So which track did you guys own?
KCIR, Kansas City International Raceway.
Okay. So why are you interested in this Topeka track?
Well, after KCIR was sold to the city and dismantled, we had a quest to build another track in Kansas City. And as a personal priority for me, and we were looking at building a national track there. Obviously, it's a large expense. One of our concerns, always has been, is that we would put a damper on Topeka. So, with that said, we've always had our eye on Topeka, maybe versus building another one in Kansas City, because it could be most likely be the demise of Topeka, and that's not what we wanted to happen. These are the same guys, same racers who would race there to here, and they wouldn't want to see it happen. And the racers are your customers, and that goes along with any racing venue, whether it be the road course or the dirt track. So, there were several attempts to try to buy the facility from Raymond and were unsuccessful.
Okay.
This is over going back several years, maybe 2-3 years. For whatever reason, it just didn't work out.
Okay.
So we just kind of been waiting in the wings. We obviously jumped at the opportunity to turn an RFP and to voice our interest in it and our abilities, and to hope that they would speak for themselves. I think it's a great combination for us. One, we're racing enthusiasts. We've operated a track before. We'd still be operating a track if we hadn't got into it basically the city. And I think that's shifting gears. I think this is a unique situation. Prior history in racing, I was fighting the city to race. And I'm out of the city, and it's going to be the opposite.
So that is,
And so tell me,
I guess he's back.
Okay, I think that's right there, what says, if you want to just state that to clarify, so that everyone knows for sure who that was.
Yeah, so that gentleman was, his name is Chris Payne. He is a real estate developer and the former owner of Kansas City International Raceway. My understanding on Kansas City International Raceway is there was some encroachment from residential, became an issue, city purchased the land from them and turned it into a park and some other things. Chris is a very successful developer. We sent our independent financial consultants and some internal financial team to review his finances, and I can have Doug or Brandon talk about that more, but long story short, they found him to be quite sufficient and having the necessary capital. The team that he's put together includes people who are real live race people. One of the names that is part of his team was the name that when we were out in California talking to NHRA who should be looking for, that was the person. So he's a very successful developer. I can say that what interested him about us and us about him is he just doesn't want to run the track. He wants to become very active in the development community for the remaining acreage out at Heartland Park, which was one of the goals that we set. In addition to that, I think he'll become a major investor and participant in this community. So we're a long way away from a finished deal. I know that we have provided you information on the RFP responses. We had 2 RFP responses that we found were responsive. Of those 2, Mr. Payne and his company really became the one that we felt was the best future success. And to be honest, the existence of Kansas Speedway, 90 miles down the road, really was an impediment to some of the really large race teams coming to Topeka. They could not compete in that market. So that concludes our presentation. I'm hoping it was helpful. We certainly want to answer any questions that you have and certainly would be available even after this meeting to address anything.
Okay. Are there any other questions we want to bring up or comments now? Councilman Shum.
For clarification, exactly how long was Mr. Payne part of the ownership team of that racetrack in Kansas City?
I can't answer that. I'd be guessing. I can get that information. We'll put a summary sheet together.
I'd appreciate that because doing research online led me to believe it was a period of a few months.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman, did you speak? Okay, Councilman Ortiz.
Thank
Sorry.
you. I'd like to know what is the net worth of Shelby? Do we know that?
Councilwoman Ortiz, Mr. Mayor, Shelby is a newly formed corporation formed specifically for this purpose. So Shelby itself has no net worth because it's newly formed. So it has no activities. It was specifically.
Newly formed for this purpose,
Indeed.
meaning situations like Heartland Park, like our purpose? What do you mean by that?
For the purpose of the Heartland Park deal.
Thank you. I would also like to see the amendment where they say we're not obligated. When will we see that?
Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Ortiz, I assume you're making reference to the same language that Councilmember Schwartz had read as part of the LOI language. You know, and that's boilerplate language that they would include. That will all be addressed if we proceed to a contract. All of those terms will be negotiated.
Okay. Well,
So at such time, before we would move forward, we would present that to you.
Okay. Did you want to say something, Chad?
Well, to clarify what Doug was talking about, the parent company is Monopoly Acquisitions. And then it's common within the business community then to form another corporation to operate individual entities. So when Doug talks about Shelby has a zero net worth, I think the question is really, okay, what's the net worth of Monopoly Acquisitions? And I don't know if we have that information or if we could get that from Columbia Capital and get that to you, because I know that was part of their examination.
Yes, we would have to get that information for you.
Well, and Mr. Mayor and Council, if I could comment on that. So obviously, whenever you're dealing with a developer, the last thing that they're going to do is turn their books over and show all of their net worth. The reason that we structured the financial review as we did, where we put a financial team, we met them at their attorneys, they opened up their books and let us took a look at it. The report back was that they have the financial soundness both to fulfill the obligations that they're meeting pertaining to Heartland Park and in terms of his development capacity and liquidity, there are sufficient funds that would make us feel very comfortable. We are not in a position that, and nor will we ever be in a position where we can show you all of his net worth. I think the key is we have a team of professionals who evaluated it and came back, and that's as good as you're ever going to get when you're dealing with a private developer.
I think what concerned me was that they were specifically put together, that team was put together for specifically situations like Heartland. That's what concerned me.
But, and Mr. Mayor and Councilman Ortiz, I don't think that should concern you, though it may. I mean, I think that's the normal business thing. They created an LLC. Any business, any development has multiple LLCs specifically for each of their projects. This team that they put together isn't a bunch of guys who met in the bar last week. This is
I didn't say that.
I know,
say that.
I'm being funny.
I didn't say that. It's not funny. I didn't say that. It just concerned me that this team was put together for a specific situation like that. That was my concern.
And I believe that the team that was put together was purposely built to be very successful at a venture like this.
With the Zero Network.
Okay.
That is an unfair
Let's go.
statement, because that is if you look at the value of any LLC, especially at the startup, you're gonna find the same thing. There's gonna be significant value in that LLC for the specific purpose of this investment.
What
Yeah,
happens,
Okay, I'm sorry.
what happens to the race agreement if the council says no on May the 5th? Does the city own the track? I already asked that one. What happens if the city says no?
Could I ask you to repeat the question? I
Sorry,
didn't
yeah,
hear it.
I don't know.
What
if I understood.
happens to the race agreement if the council says no on May 5th?
And by race agreement, you're referring to the NHRA contract. It does not get exercised. It doesn't exist.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor.
Any other questions? Councilman Schwartz?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This has been a long night. We've talked about a lot of things. One of the things, and I've looked at the proposal, and we just got the proposals tonight. I am more impressed with his proposal than any of the other proposals. There's a couple of things in here I'm concerned about. But I'm also, Lario, I think, had it first. They failed. Jayhawk Racing had it next. They failed. Now we want to go with, what are you calling it? What's going to be the
Shelby.
buzzword? Shum. What is it?
Shum Racing.
Shum Racing. Shelby, okay. I'm sorry. Shelby.
Apology accepted.
So Shelby would be the new operator, and he's got some things in here like, and I'm sure racers or people that do drag racing know that he's interested in having Charles Harmon III, who has been a professional motorsports venue manager and promoter for nearly 30 years, also involved in it. So I think it is very impressive. The question I have about this proposal is that very last sentence. And, well, the next to the last sentence. Finally, my client will require receipt of all available funds from Visit Topeka to be utilized in the promotion of the raceway. What does that mean?
So that has been the bone that everybody's been stealing from everybody else. Every time we've talked, some NHRA included it. That is a non-starter language. We have had conversations, if this body will remember, that there previously was a direct allocation of transient guest tax monies to Heartland Park during the last 12, it might have been 12 months ago or 24 months ago, I don't remember at this time. We made a policy decision as a body to allocate all of those monies to Visit Topeka. The responsibility that Visit Topeka has is to evaluate Heartland Park, Expo Center, TPAC, and others, and make the decisions that are best. That is totally outside of the hands of the city, and we state that clearly and often.
So we can disregard that last sentence, or that sentence?
Yeah, and I know my lawyer wants to get in. I understanding what you're looking at is a response to a proposal where really a lot of conversations haven't occurred yet. And then you have the LOI, which is what you made reference to earlier, which once again is, this is their wish list, and are saying, okay, that's a good place to start. Nothing is really going to be real until we negotiate a contract, and that always becomes the fun part. And I guarantee you, that's where the city will be protected.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
Sorry,
What you wanna
Mr. Mayor. Just one thing. I know I'm probably going to kick a dead horse here, but Visit Topeka is its own entity. Visit Topeka has its own board of directors. Visit Topeka has its own executive director, and Visit Topeka has its own council. So that's an issue that people have had their trouble getting their head around. It needs to be made clear publicly that Visit Topeka is their own entity, that the city of Topeka doesn't make direct distributions to entities anymore. The executive director and board of director makes the best decision in terms of attracting people to Topeka. So,
Okay, if we could move on to public, I'm sorry, I'm going to go to public comment, but do you have one other point? Yes.
Well, I think people still do have some questions now that we are talking about the vendor, and I know that it's been a long time, but I also understand from the comments that have come throughout all this time that one of the gut concerns people have had is, okay, we get all this ready, and then are we going to have, there's a certain amount of integrity involved in everybody's discussions that they don't want to spend anybody's money or put it at risk if we don't have a good vendor. I thought that the article in this morning's paper was pretty good, describing some of the qualifications that this prospective vendor has, as well as, I think it was in that article, the suggestions that he had for other activities and improvements to the park. I would like, if we could, to have the city manager or whoever spend some time describing to this body here and those who are in the audience and on TV just what this vendor is proposing.
So we can do that. Chad can do that. You might want to borrow her document. But I really think that, and your comment is great, but I really think the true value is for us to go back and start putting together the bullet points of the contract, because the key here, I love to trust people, but
I'm sorry, and please, we do not respond to the discussion, positive or negative in any way. We respect everyone's views and how they speak. Let's maintain that decorum. Thank you. You proceed.
I'm incapable of not verifying and making sure that we have good contracts in place. It's absolutely vital. You cannot manage an organization like this. You cannot do what we need to do without making sure that we have good contracts. And I believe that that's the best next step, is to outline it. We're happy to outline what's included in the LOI, but understand that creates an impression of a final deal that I think is hard to remove from people. Certainly the document's available, people can look at it, they will, we know that they will, and I know that people will be critical of it. I think it's more important that we go out and we come, if this body decides to proceed with this, we will continue to fine tune that contract. So, Chad.
okay. I think probably the best thing to do is, and hopefully it'll answer the question, Mr. Mayor, if I may, that kind of the general overview of his plan, his idea, and then again, once if this goes through on May 5th and we go down this road, we can get more specific as we go along. It's important to understand where we're at as a starting point. We've done an evaluation of the RFPs. We've received a letter of intent. If you're talking about racing, that's just the very beginning of the process. But I think what was pointed out in the paper to some degree and what's been attractive is, number one, the people that he has engaged to run Heartland Park. There was mention of Charlie Harmon, who is somebody that carries significant weight with the NHRA in terms of promotions. There are other individuals that are involved not only in drag racing, but other types of racing that he's engaged that are national and local experts in the racing field. And as I'm sure you can understand, a lot of those people are employed by other employers at this point in time. So until we get farther down the road to say it's this person, and this person, you get into a situation their employer hears that and they're out of a job. So, I mean, we've had those discussions and that will become public. If after May 5th, we have a vote and we're moving down the road, then at some point, all of those names will become public. The one that he felt comfortable sharing was Charlie Harmon with his connection to NHRA. I also think what the city manager hit on, his concept for that area around Heartland Park, and research and development related to racing, and creating storage facilities specific to racing that would support that research and development. One thing that he talked about, and I don't know if it made it in the paper, but in the interview, was that what they've run into, and he used the example of fuel pumps, people that are developing fuel pumps, different technology in racing. One of the big issues is transporting them to a facility that, you know, having these warehouses, these facilities where they can have their entire operations there and use Heartland Park for research and development. So I think he has some innovative ideas and things we hadn't heard before in terms of developing that area. So I think that's the general broad brush overview. And again, the plan is to make him available on May 5th, answer questions, and you could ask him more specifics about what his specific plan is. But his vision is more than the NHRA showing up once a year to run a drag race. His vision is to diversify the track, to have concerts, to have art shows, to have events out there. And diversification is something that was very important, I think, to all of us as we talked about Heartland Park. So just as the general overview, I think that's where we're at right now.
Thank you.
Okay.
I thought that was really important to bring out. It's something we'd hoped with the, particularly this most recent vendor that just didn't develop. And so if people are weary tonight, if there was some direction before May 5th, not on May 5th, where people could find out more and be satisfied that this gentleman actually does have the experience in development and success, that with those ideas or whatever subsequent ideas emerge, that we're fairly satisfied, we as well as the public, because they're talking to us, that he could do it, would be important, I think. Thank you.
Another comment?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Councilmember Hiller. I think, and I want to be clear in what I said, I think that it is important, we can feel as good as we want about something or somebody. It is more important that we have a contractual relationship that establishes specific performance standards and specific penalties if those performance standards aren't met. But you don't enter into a contract like that with somebody that you don't feel can meet it. And we feel that way today. We will continue to push this. But the key is to get a contract in place that gives the city a significant ability to control its environment, which is something we've never had in the past before.
Okay, good.